Welcome to Retro Fanfic Retrospective, the podcast where we dredge up old fanfiction and expose it to the cold, harsh light of 2020. My name is Amato, and with me are...
Tori.
And Dom.
And unfortunately, this is the second time we've been talking about this same fanfic, because technical issues made us lose the vast majority of our former recording, leaving us to ask... Scooby Dooby Doo episode, where are you?
Scooby Dooby Doo, where's the last hour of that audio?
Have we tried unmasking everybody in our lives?
I tried, but it just made the waveform worse.
Well, I'm out then. Instead of trap, maybe?
Right.
Maybe it'll wander into the trap.
I just hope you all know I resisted the temptation to introduce myself as Dommy Doo. I have no idea what that even would have been.
I think the obvious one is Scooby Dom.
Oh,
Scooby Dooby Dom.
Amato with the big ideas again.
I know. That's why I'm in charge-ish.
Idea Man.
Mm-hmm.
That's your superhero name.
Idea man, geez. Just like noun man, that is just the worst kind of superhero name for like people to come up with. It's like when someoe's trying to come up with a new Pokemon, but they don't really get Pokemon, and they name it like a Digimon, and they're like, This is, Lightbulb Mon, and you're like, that's not how Pokemon works.
I think you should just go with your Transformers name.
What's my Transformers name?
Fix Saver.
Oh yeah, Fixaver. I like Fixaver.
Yeah.
Probably turn into a floppy disk.
Yeah, I think that's what you said before.
Oh, great. I'm exactly as clever now as I was back in the Transformers episode.
Perfect.
Now we know.
That's usually how I find myself as well. When I re-listen to our episodes, I'm like, when you guys are talking, I'm like, oh, I should have said that. And then I hear myself say it. So.
Right. Well, speaking of having said things and then hearing ourselves say it again, we are recording this episode again, mostly because I liked this fanfic and I kind of, it was a shame not to talk about it.
Totally.
But before we talk about this fanfic for today, which is titled Scooby Dooby Doo, Where Are You?, we should talk about Scooby Doo and us. I'll go first.
Okay.
So basically, I cared very, very little about Scooby-Doo. I watched like a couple episodes of Mystery Incorporated back when it was coming out because it's a good show that I should probably watch more than a couple episodes of. Mm-hmm. But then for about, I don't know, a period of 5 months-ish, my oldest kid was really into Scooby-Doo and watched a couple of the movies on Netflix or streaming services, one of the Lego movies, Lego Scooby-Doo. It's a thing now. Mm-hmm. We got a few issues of like the Scooby-Doo magazine, subscribed. He'd check out books from the library. And so I was like, oh yeah, Scooby-Doo. That is totally a thing. And shockingly, it's still a thing. And I still can't quite wrap my mind over the fact that like new Scooby-Doo content is being produced at a fairly consistent rate in the year of our Lord 2020. But in any case, it made me really want to find a Scooby-Doo fanfic. And so I did, and I made you two read it. What's your background?
Yeah, they're still making stuff, aren't they? They had that new movie back in May.
Yeah. It's supposed to be really bad.
I mean, the
probably
CGI
did not
looks
have
good.
enough Linda Cardellini in it, I would assume.
Could be. I'm not sure who's doing the voice now.
Mm-hmm. I also did not check whether Linda Cardellini is in the new Scooby-Doo movie because I do not care. But just saying.
Right.
Do you two have any Scooby-Doo feels or opinions whatsoever?
I watch Scooby-Doo occasionally. I had antenna TV growing up, but my grandparents lived nearby and they had cable. And so sometimes I'd go up to their place and watch the TV in the bathroom on Cartoon Network, and I'd catch old reruns of Scooby-Doo. So I've seen a few here and there, including some with like the little annoying one.
Scrappy.
I'm pretty sure I've seen that, although I think the part of my brain has just erased it to protect myself.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I must have seen some Scrappy-Doo content, but I also don't remember it really firmly. I think it just absorbed the general pop culture's hatred for Scrappy-Doo. But
yeah,
it's warranted.
But Tori is going to stand up for Scrappy-Doo here, right? You did last time.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say I did like Scrappy when I was a kid, because he's a puppy, and he was kind of cute. He was like, I'm gonna fight everybody, hold me back. it was a little bit adorable. I get why people don't like him. It's kind of a gimmick, and I can't hold any hatred in my heart for like a funny little puppy, to be honest.
I guess it's kind of unfair to hate, Scrappy-Doo for being a tired gimmick, because all of Scooby-Doo is kind of a tired gimmick. Like it's very, it's got a form, right?
Sure.
It's got a formula, you might say.
Yes.
None of us cared too deeply about Scooby-Doo, I suppose, going into it.
Yeah. My heart is dead enough where I can hate Scrappy-Doo just fine.
Yeah. Well, I watched a lot of Scooby-Doo as a kid, but like as a grown-up, it's like it's been decades. Like, what do I even remember about that shit other than it was pretty formulaic?
Do you remember all the drugs they did?
Oh yeah, of course. They were constantly getting high.
Well, I think maybe this fanfic author remembers it better than you do, or possibly worse. Let's go into the story. It once again is titled Scooby Dooby Doo, Where Are You? Which is like titling your Dragon Ball Z fanfic.
Dragon Ball Z, where are you? Sorry.
Or the Dragon Ball or something.
The Dragon Ball, right. I can't get behind that title, but whatever, I'll give it a pass. The author is named Yorick Jones, and this story was published on fanfiction.net back in 2005. To my knowledge, only there, but I could be wrong. So, right up against the edge of officially being retro in my arbitrary standards. But it was the best Scooby-Doo fanfic that I could find, and it's got a good hook that when I glanced at it made me want to keep reading it.
I was kind of surprised it was actually published so late, dealing with how familiar the author is with like the time period it wrote about.
Yeah. So this is a story in the form of memoirs by Velma Dinkley.
It's an
and
AU.
we get that premise like immediately.
Yeah.
What were you saying, Dom?
It's in a AU.
Yes, it's in an AU, but it's if anything more realistic than original Scooby-Doo. I mean, obviously, because like no talking dogs in this AU. Which
is definitely an alternative universe to the show. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it is.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's historical fiction is what this story is. It's set very firmly. Like I said, Velma's writing it in probably the modern day-ish. And it's because she's a successful author and she's been hired to write a series of short articles about, her past or like from her life or whatever. And she's getting paid enough that she's like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. Why not? But it centers very, very heavily. She's writing about her experiences in the late 60s, late 1960s, because that's kind of when the Scooby-Doo aesthetic comes from, right?
Yeah.
It's like, it came out in what? Is 1969 or something, like really late 60s. Or like 70, but it's like clearly these kids they're cruising around in a hippie van, and Shaggy is very clearly a hippie. And Tori, you were commenting in our Lost recording that like all of them are sort of like young person stereotypes from that era.
Absolutely. I mean, this was very like late 60s, early 70s. Like Shaggy's the stoner, Fred's the like boat shoe wearing preppy, Velma's basically just a nerd, I think, and Daphne is a mod girl. So it's very much the aesthetic of the time.
I know nothing about mod fashion, but if you tell me they looked like Daphne, then like, okay, now I get it.
Yeah, Mona wasn't interested in that until it became retro.
I'm sure it probably became fashionable again and then, you know, out of fashion again multiple times. That's
of course
how fashion works to my knowledge. And so we get our first kind of setup is that like Velma shows up at college and in Rhode Island. What's the name of the college they go to? Providence College. Guess that makes sense. Is that a real place?
College? Yeah, I think that's a place that people pay money to go to for some reason.
I did.
Me too.
I'm at Providence College specifically, though. Yeah, apparently, it is. It's a private Catholic university in Rhode Island. Okay, well, you know, I got my master's degree from a Catholic university. It just was not very Catholic. They'll take anyone's money.
I do think that's generally how universities work.
And anyway, the deal is that she's coming from a small town and like, you know, she's kind of like uptight, not uptight, but like she's there to like get the college experience and like be lose herself in cool classes and learn to write because she's an aspiring writer. But she meets this series of characters, first Shaggy, who she literally bumps into when she first gets there, and then Daphne, who turns out is her roommate, and then Fred, who Daphne starts dating in fairly short order. And this seems like a good time to kind of talk about how they're basically presented in this story, as opposed to, you know, any Scooby-Doo episode you might have seen.
I guess more archetypal in that sense than in Scooby-Doo. It's like you kind of wonder how this cast of characters came together.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, there's an explanation. It's like Daphne's introduced by calling a bunch of sororities. Like, she doesn't even say hi to Velma. She's busy calling all the sororities to try to pledge to them at the time that Velma comes in the room. And then they bond because Velma's like, she says something snarky about it, and Daphne laughs, and then they become friends. It explains how they're all thrown together, basically.
Daphne's presented as like being a really like straight A student, like, quote, you know, doing everything right kind of thing in her life, like as it's sort of laid out for her. But also she's like self-aware enough that she can laugh about it. And she's self-aware enough that she begins to question it. Like once she kind of gets to poke around and like imagine the things she could be doing.
Right. Like the story as a whole kind of reads not so much like Scooby-Doo, but more like, you know, a college experience for someone during the Vietnam War, like these people who become radicalized and travel over the country to protest and live in radical communities. It's very interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And then Shaggy is kind of put at odds with his cartoon persona. And very specifically, and the author's very aware of that, in that he is in the cartoon, he'd be like hungry and nervous, right? Is kind of his things going on. And in this, he is very chill. He's like friendly, but very, very chill. Like he's, you know, conflict averse, but in the sense that like he's not going to get any conflict, not in that he's going to like flee from it, you know. And his thing is less eating food and more doing drugs as the course of things, you know, continues in the story.
Yeah, it's an interesting extrapolation of the character. And the author, or Velma as the narrator, comes to identify this later on, that like when she talks about Shaggy in her own rewriting of the story that happens later, she makes him more fearful, though it's not really explained why. But it's nice
just because she thought it would be funny, I guess.
Yeah, but it's a good idea. Like, it's what everyone thought, you know, that Shaggy was just smoking a lot of weed.
Yeah, the hunger, you know, is definitely code, right, for like having the munchies, unquote.
And the dopey behavior, you know, and the raggedy looks, like he's a stoner archetype.
And then Fred, it's interesting in this story, you get the least from Fred. But that's kind of because it's Velma writing it, and Velma ends up least close to Fred as the course of things, you know, as the story continues.
Yeah.
And he feels kind of the least interesting as a result, I feel like.
Well,
I don't know. He's a guy.
yeah. Initially, he does feel very uninteresting. But I also feel like that's kind of how he was in Scooby-Doo. It's like, what was... Like, not that any of them had a lot of distinct characteristics, but, like, I feel like Fred might be the least distinct in the initials. Like, he's just a guy, right?
In Mystery Incorporated, they make him obsessed with traps. It's great. Like setting them.
I've heard a lot of good things about Mystery Incorporated.
I don't think that's all that's going on with his character, but, like...
No.
It makes it charming for him to be this, like, kind of, I don't know, trap nerd. I don't know. It's probably not a thing in the real world. It probably is a thing in the real world, come to think of it.
We've played D&D. We've probably met that person.
Right.
Absolutely.
And the people come together because Velma and Fred are dating, and they, like, start dating, like, real seriously, like, committed, like, they attach themselves at the hip once they get together. And again, not Velma and Fred. Jeez, that would be weird. Daphne and Fred. And then Velma's Daphne's roommate, and amusingly, Shaggy is Fred's sorority brother. Because, like, they got him into the sorority because he's their drug hookup. And, like, it seems like a cute real-world detail. And I've got to say, one thing this story is good about is having lots of little verisimilitude-inducing details.
Mm-hmm.
Both about the characters and about the time period.
Yeah. I would say that the way they all got together was contrived, except that it's, like I said before, it's such a better explanation than
no explanation?
Than the non-explanation we get initially. And of course, that's not the author's goal. The goal is to go somewhere completely different than how they all met up. So they definitely give us enough.
And also with the style being like a memoir, it kind of builds around the idea that there's spaces in the description, things happen off screen, and yada yada yada, that they hook up and they're friends.
Yeah.
Right. And the author also kind of lets there be a little bit of build-up in that the first time they're together as a group, it's because Daphne and Fred are trying to set up Shaggy and Velma and kind of have them come along on a double date. And, they get along fine, but it's not like there's any chemistry. But that kind of does introduce the four of them as four people who go out and do something together. After that, they sort of... We'll skip over a lot of little details and, go back to any that we want to talk about later. They start attending protests and stuff. It seems like Daphne is sort of like the main driving force here. And then, Fred is her significant other. And, Daphne... Not Velma, Daphne. Jeez, I don't know what's wrong with me today. I did not do this last time. Feels like Daphne is kind of like the spearhead here of, like, social activism.
To be completely honest, if I'm not looking at the characters, I can confuse any four of their names for the other.
Yeah.
Could you look at Fred and say, no, not even look at him, but could you imagine Fred and say, yes, that guy's name is Shaggy?
No.
Or
No.
Scooby.
Maybe.
Maybe, yeah.
I could see him as Scooby.
I could see him as a Scooby too. I agree.
Anyone can be a Scooby.
He's just the opposite of being Shaggy is all.
Yeah.
That's fair. That's
a
fair.
point.
Yeah, but they do. Yeah, they get to this point where they're all, getting radicalized. But there's a little buildup before that. There's Daphne introducing Shaggy to Velma by setting them up on a date.
Right.
And we get a little revelation about Velma's past, that she was never... she's never been on a date, I guess, was basically it. She's never really, like, kissed anyone. She does kiss Shaggy.
Yeah, but it's interesting, the framing. There's this thing being built up that, like, Velma at this time in her life is not sure what's going on, but she's fairly obsessed with Daphne. And, when she kisses Shaggy, what she's thinking in her mind is like, oh, so like, Daphne, you have like a hot boyfriend? Well, I can make out with someone too. Take that, Daphne Blake. And, she kisses Shaggy with that going through her mind in, less words. I'm expanding it.
Also, I think that was, I don't recall correctly, but wasn't she like smoking weed or something for the first time at that point.
It's around that time.
Yeah, or something.
Oh, and she has this. I think she has the same thing in mind. Is like, take that, Daphne. I'm not a total square.
Yeah, I think that was a little bit
pot.
A little bit later when they first started going to marches, but it was the same idea.
Yeah.
Yeah,
for sure.
But yeah, like I'm saying, those are the things that build up to that. Is that their relationships are developing, and that's basically what I say.
And when you talk about like them being radicalized during this time too, like when they're attending protests, like Shaggy gets his skull cracked by a police officer, right?
Yeah.
And like that's the kind of thing, you know, that happens sometimes, and that might kind of solidify some of your opinions towards the adult society. And then leading up into kind of the more or less Scooby-Doo cast driving around in a van that we know, there's a few other things like, you know, Shaggy and Fred get high and paint the van.
Yeah.
And Shaggy gets kind of like, starts just kind of like mentioning, oh, like California is super cool, like all this stuff going on in San Francisco or whatever.
Yeah, they have a few whimsical moments where they talk about San Francisco. That's where everything's really going on.
Mm-hmm.
And this is also, after like a strong build towards everybody like kind of smoking weed together and hanging out together and going to protests together for a while. It's like they've all become part of this group. Even Velma, who was, very reserved at first.
Because we didn't really mention, but they started off as a like small town naive person who's been slowly opening up.
Yeah, Velma, for sure. Their father was like the town sheriff. Excuse me. Their father was the town sheriff, and like we're going to get a kind of flashback to their childhood that sort of shows the sort of normal white oppression by like, her parents that she got. We'll get to that in a moment.
Yeah, that's actually my favorite part. So.
We'll let you talk about it in a moment because it happens right after what is supposed to be a big turning point, which is that they're driving around. It's like a rainstorm, and they find a big dog.
Mm-hmm. They find
and it talks to them.
No, they find a juvenile Great Dane.
Yeah, probably about 4 months old based on the weight.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess not the biggest of dogs.
No, it's like 60-something pounds at the time, but as a Great Dane, that would be about 4 months old.
So they look for a collar, and they don't find anything. They start knocking on doors in the neighborhood. Nobody recognizes the dog or know where the dog's from. They expand their search radius a little bit. Keep knocking on doors, expand it a little bit, until eventually they just realize they've like driven out of Rhode Island, which I guess is pretty easy to do, probably considering the size. But at some point, they just decide to keep driving.
Yeah. And there's a cute little scene about how Scooby-Doo gets his name, which is like from Shaggy kind of lying drowsy with him, and I guess Velma's the one who sings a snatch of the whatever song that's just from. It's like a Frank Sinatra song, right?
Well, like they were both. Yeah. Shaggy and the dog were both like asleep in each other's arms or something.
Oh, that's right. And Velma sings "Strangers in the Night," Scooby Dooby Doo.
Yeah.
I don't know that song.
In the night.
And then the line is, "The Great Dane lifted its head as if in answer and fixed me briefly with its blank, moist eyes before settling back onto Shaggy's chest. From out of nowhere, Shaggy muttered, he heard his name." And they name him Scooby Doo.
That's a good description of Great Dane eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's the turning point in their kind of like counterculture experience. Is that when they kind of just take off all together in a van, and they're ditching college, like they're leaving that behind them. They're failing their classes. They're dropping out of college. They're just like driving west, or mostly west.
At this point, they've been kind of dropped out of college anyways. They've stopped going to classes altogether for a while.
Yeah, but more officially, I guess.
Yeah, leaving the state is pretty big.
Yeah. And then we get that really interesting flashback chapter, which is the only time that Velma, the writer, goes back deeper into her past in this series of memoirs. Mm-hmm. And Tori, lead the way telling us what happens in it, because it's a really good chapter.
It's what really made me like this fanfic. Like, basically, Velma, that chapter ends with the cackle, like, oh, they started laughing, the cackle of the fatigued, we kept driving. The next chapter starts, it's called Set It Free. And then it's all Velma's reflection. And what happens is she talks, we said her father is the sheriff of a small town. She talks about getting caught playing doctor with another little girl when she was very young, and how her parents like chastised her and scolded her. I'm trying to look at it and like remember it a little bit better. But
there's that really good line.
Yeah.
We didn't know there was anything wrong with it, but from the look on our parents' faces as they jerked our little flowery dresses back on with hard, frantic tugs, it was made abundantly clear that we were the worst little girls in the world. No words, none were necessary.
That was the line I was looking for. I know I read it our first take through. It's such a good line.
Hits you in the feels.
And it keeps going. You want to finish that paragraph? It's like the second paragraph in that chapter, where once I believed.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah. No words, none were necessary. Where once I believed it to be celebrating my 8th birthday at the Winter Fantasy Ice Rink, it was now for sure I'd be blowing out my candles in hell. So good. I don't think I cried, but I know I blushed hot and red, not only embarrassed, but angry at not knowing what I had to be embarrassed about. It was the start of a shame that took years to vanquish. Probably the best paragraph in this fanfic, and
it's so real, right?
It's so real. It's what I don't know. It moved me so much. It's what made me really enchanted with this story. And then, of course, after that, she decides to run away from home.
Right, as an 8-year-old.
Right, and I loved this too because she's running away from home because she's so ashamed. Not knowing what she has to be ashamed about, but knowing, this like deep sense of wrong. It's taken her a lifetime to overcome. It's so relatable. And then there's this other amazing part where she's kind of fantasizing, and this is like kind of where her creativity comes in. She's running away and she's like, you could say I was a bit proud of my criminal genius as I slipped easily from my window to the friendly waiting branches of an oak beside her house. My plan was like clockwork. Next stop, Canada, where under my new name of Ramona Eloise d'Artagnan, exotic and mysterious, n'est pas, I would instantly fall in with the wrong kind of folks, the rough crowd. All the thieves, cutthroats, and thugs would accept me as one of their own, and in time, Sheriff Martin Dinkley's only little girl would be recognized as their natural leader, the Moriarty of Montreal. I would even send maddening clues of my nefarious plots back to the Plum City Police Department and watch them scramble. Someone snatched all the gold in Fort Knox. They've yanked the crown jewels right out from under the Queen's snoot. Some fiend has kidnapped Peggy Lee and is demanding $1 trillion ransom. Who? Why, Ramona, the devil, d'Artagnan, of course, arch supervillain who can sleep late every day and play doctor with anyone she pleases. So good.
It's the and play doctor with anyone she pleases thing that really sells that sequence.
Such a kid thing to want.
I know. She fantasizes she's just like a Moriarty style villain who can play doctor with anyone she pleases.
Right.
I love it.
And the sequence goes on like, her dad ends up like kind of locking her in jail temporarily, just kind of to show that he cares what happens to her in her life, I guess.
Yeah, that's a normal thing to do, sure.
Right. She says, like, these days you'd probably call it child abuse, but like I more or less got the intent behind what he was, trying to convey. And, then he came and hugged me and all that kind of stuff. And so it's not like the parents are villainized exactly either. It's just they're, passing along some certain concepts and shames in their parenting there. And then we jump back into the present and kind of not present, like the 1960s, but like the main time frame and sort of stay there for the rest of the story, more or less.
Mm-hmm.
And in summary, they're kind of cruising around, the country. seeing America, finding America, if you will, on
was it
their
missing?
way west towards California. I mean, I haven't seen America. Have you?
I saw some of it, but I don't think it's missing, though. I think we have a pretty good idea where it is.
On the contrary, it is probably too much space.
I was going to say there's a lot more America than most people think there is. So.
Yeah.
And here's where, you as a reader, you're like reading a Scooby-Doo fanfic. And at this point, they are in a van. They are driving across the country. And you are thinking, so is this when they solve a mystery? Or rewrite history?
To be fair, though, I think at this point I was like, Scooby-Doo hasn't talked yet. I think this is going somewhere else.
Well, I wasn't expecting Scooby-Doo to talk, but I was kind of expecting there to be a mystery that they solve.
No, you're right. I think I was in that similar spot, but I was on the edge. I was like, this definitely seems like it's going somewhere else.
I was kind of dreading the turn because, like, the tone of the fanfic in the fake memoirs thing was very, like, it did a good job of talking like someone's memories and really grounded in reality. And I wasn't really looking forward to a shoehorned in mystery element because that's where the show was. But they ended up incorporating it into the story in a different way.
Yeah. What happens is one time when they're hanging out in a diner and creative writing major or former creative writing major, aspiring, writer Velma sees just like some other patron in the place who has like a really interesting face, like he's a character actor sort of face, where she's like, oh man, that guy would just make a great villain. And she starts making up a story and just telling it to her friends there, like just on the spot, in which like there is a mystery. He's like, oh, he's the guy who owns the abandoned.
Yeah, she turns to them and goes, you know who that is? That's Old Man Jenkins. He owns the abandoned amusement park down the way.
Mm-hmm. Hey, yeah? Shaggy bobbed along with it while Fred quizzed. How do you know? You've never been here before. Daphne just rolled her eyes at her boyfriend's thickness.
So they introduced the concept of Scooby-Doo into the story as basically just that, just like a literal... Later that they end up telling the stories over again over a campfire, so they're just campfire stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They start hooking up with like caravans of other people traveling, and Velma ends up kind of telling these stories, always on the spot. She's not writing them beforehand. She's not writing them down. She's just improvising them every time. Yeah. But just like she starts telling them to like an audience of whoever else is around also as they're traveling.
Yeah.
Other counterculture peeps.
And to jump ahead just a little bit, I expected that this would turn into some sort of commercial success for the character. That like, oh, this is
too.
Like they wrote down the stories, made a collection of books, and this is how they got famous. But they ended up doing that in a different way later on. So this was just something they did at the moment, and I'm just talking about it now in the memoirs.
Yeah, it's good because that would have felt very pat. From the start that Velma's a successful author, and now that like people are receiving these Scooby-Doo stories that she's coming up with, and so you expect that like, oh, she's going to publish them, and that doesn't happen, and I'm very glad. What I do like about it that's like so clever in terms of Scooby-Doo mythos is that like people will, while they're listening, throw things at her that they want her to incorporate into the story, and so they're like, have Batman show up, and she'll be like, fine, Batman shows up. And like, this is what happens. Or like Three Stooges. And she's like, okay, the Three Stooges are being incorporated into this story now.
The Harlem Globetrotters.
Right. And the reason it's so brilliant is because Scooby-Doo has always had such a history of these random ass crossover guest appearances. Like, characters, all those characters have shown up in Scooby-Doo at one time or another and like helped pull someone's mask off, whatever. And so it just kind of like, it jives so well with the kind of kitchen sink pop culture feel of the Scooby-Doo franchise in general for Velma to be doing that in her storytelling. And I was just very tickled by it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Red is trying to knock everything I'm recording with over right now, and I don't know why.
Probably she wants a Scooby snack.
Yeah, apparently. So sorry. Red. Hot. Hey.
A red snack?
That sounds like a different thing.
Wait.
Sounds less appetizing.
It sounds like something that McCarthy would be afraid of.
Well, I'm sorry, Dawn, because there's a couple spikes on here because she like punched the recording equipment.
That'll be fine. You weren't talking anyway, so I'll just mute everything.
Yeah.
From that file.
So what you're saying is that red is not Scooby-Doo, red is Scrappy-Doo.
Apparently. She's been so nutty today. So I'm just going to see if I can calm her down before we keep going, because I don't want her to keep doing this. What are you doing?
But then in their road trip journey, we kind of reach I guess it's the climax of the story. The last part of the story kind of has its own thing going on, which we'll get to, but this feels like the climax, which is that Fred calls home just to check in, say like, hey, I'm alive. We're, going over on I don't know. We're in a van. Forget it. But anyway, he finds out the news that a childhood friend of his died in Vietnam. And this is a friend who, when they were little kids, they had, said, oh, yeah, we'll go to the army together and, have each other's back and do surely good, glorious warrior things or whatever.
Yeah.
And that guy, Jimmy, is now dead.
At this point in their journey, they're in Death Valley within spitting distance of San Francisco, apparently.
I'd forgotten that detail, but that makes sense thematically.
Yeah.
That was their goal, was to get to San Francisco. So.
Mm-hmm. And on top of that, it appears that Fred has been drafted. A month ago was his 20th birthday, and he hasn't burned his draft card or anything. He's got it. Seems like he's in for Vietnam.
Yeah, Shaggy said something about getting a draft card and just burning it a long time ago. But, it's Shaggy, so Fred's got his own thing going on.
Yeah, I like the line where, specifically, doesn't Shaggy say, he burned his draft card, and Fred is like, no, you didn't. You just, forgot to burn it and lost it. Mm. And Shaggy says, yeah, well, I would have burned it. So, same principle, whatever. But yeah, Fred is having a moment of doubt in what he's doing with his life. And specifically, he's kind of inclined to go to Vietnam just to prove he's not a coward. He's not just trying to escape Vietnam by doing all the counterculture stuff here and smoking grass for peace is what he says, that sort of thing.
Yeah, Fred has been going along with things, but they haven't necessarily been a true believer. And this is the first time their faith, I guess you can call it, has been shaken.
Yeah.
Totally. And it's that's his background, right? Not only his friend, but what he was expected to do. So I totally understand his perspective in this. Yeah.
It's coming from a very real place. But no one else is on board with this. There's kind of a sequence here that I like from Fred, kind of how things are going in his mind and how he's sort of projecting his thoughts on other people. Daphne's eyes had gone wide with disbelief. Why? Because of some thick-headed guilt over the death of your friend? No, because I'm not entirely certain that this whole tune in, turn on, drop out thing is really coming from some moral outrage, or if it's just a more romantic form of cowardice. You know I don't want to kill anybody, and I sure as hell don't want to die, but I don't like the feeling that I'm just running away. He turned to Shaggy. If you were honest with yourself, Shaggy, you'd realize you've got the same doubts. Then you don't know shit, man, Shaggy said as he stood, his expression a mix of frustration and sadness that I'd never seen grace his features before. He pointed one grease-stained finger at Fred's draft card. That thing is a solid bummer and it'll make you as dead as Jimmy. And he stalks off. And Daphne and Fred spend the night shouting at each other and that sort of thing. It's a conflict.
Because Daphne is a true believer.
Yeah. And what you were saying this about Shaggy, it's an important moment for Shaggy because he hasn't been the one with a serious emotional, stance or core up until now.
No, nobody has really taken him seriously. They think he's nice and all, but a little out of it, does too many drugs, etc. And even up to that point where Fred's talking about him losing his draft card, it's like he's not being taken seriously. But this was a very serious moment for him.
Yeah.
It showed that, he was a serious person. This is actually very important to him.
And that's sort of his moment here. It's an important moment for all four of them. And the way it becomes very important for Velma is that, that night after their like interminable shouting match argument, Daphne comes into, what is it, her tent? They have tents set up? Yeah, tents set up in Death Valley, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a really interesting scene. Daphne starts crying. She's in an emotional place. She kind of expresses how jealous she is over Velma's writing talent, because Velma was sitting down just like writing down some of her stories and that sort of thing. And complains, about Fred's dumb masculinity complex and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the conversation, she's saying like, oh, I'm such a jerk. That's why he wants to go off and die in friggin' Vietnam. Hey, I interjected. Cut yourself some slack. You're smart, beautiful, funny, and you really care about the world around you. Fred got lucky and he knows it. She laughed, but it was a shy little laugh. It was her turn to be flattered. She pulled back from me and was now peering into my eyes, summing me up or taking me in. It was, ridiculously, a scary moment for me. I think you love me a little too, don't you, Vel? And it's been, heavily implied, but like it's not like Velma was really clear that like she's into girls and specifically into Daphne. And like that's kind of what's been going on with her in her college experience, as well as the whole counterculture angle.
It hasn't been codified just yet, and then until this moment.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's a really sweet scene here where Daphne kind of asks to have sex with Velma because she wants to spend the night, as she says it, with somebody who loves her and like hasn't let her down, and like she needs that kind of, she needs that care and that physical and emotional connection with someone who is not her machismo ridden jerk boyfriend who she's having a fight with right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's kind of like a really sweet scene. Like the consent is there, the caring's there, and there's kind of like some really good writing about it by, much future Velma, who is writing this as a memoir, right?
Mm-hmm.
I like this line here. I have had many lovers since, many of whom I have felt for much more intensely than ever I did Miss Daphne Blake, but I've never experienced a night as romantic as that desert night, with its new tastes and textures. And the reason I like it so much is just that it's easy for you writing a story to kind of make something like this a more important moment in the life of someone than, it might be.
Right.
And like, so she's saying like, oh, it was important because of this, because it was like a new opening of like me realizing, who I am and like having this first experience. But it also wasn't like the most significant relationship of my life,
Yeah.
In like decades and decades and decades.
I like that a lot about Velma's tone as a narrator and all this, because she's supposed to be so much older, decades older. And now she's trying to reflect back on, very youthful experiences and still give them meaning and context. And they do have meaning.
But they don't.
Yeah.
They never seem to overshadow the fact that she has lived a whole life since then either.
Exactly.
And I feel like that's a really kind of deft thing that the author did with this story in that memoir form.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's the other context of, if this is a memoir, but it's a fictional memoir. It's like in a real memoir, we're not going to pick on experiences that don't mean something to us in some way. But as a fictional memoir about Scooby-Doo, the author had to pick moments that would also mean something to an audience that appreciated these characters. You know what I mean? So like they do a good job constructing the memoir narrative in a way that their audience would appreciate, as well as making Velma feel like herself, but also this real defined character they've created.
I appreciate that you reminded us that we are reading a story about Scooby-Doo, because I'd kind of forgotten at that point.
Honestly, I forgot about it through pretty much the entire thing. It to me just read as a story, kind of separate from fan fiction.
It kind of is. I mean, I was kind of where Amato is for a while, or what Amato was saying, I mean, for a while, where it was like, when is the mystery gonna happen? And then when I realized that it wasn't, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna take this in the direction it goes. And it does go somewhere new, but I don't think it fully takes us away from who those characters kind of were in their archetype in Scooby-Doo.
Yeah.
Like, it is very, very different, but not so different that I would create a criticism around that. You know what I mean?
It's different, but it feels explained, earned even, maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The author
It
did some
definitely
work.
builds its own... Yeah, it builds its own world and its own, like, reason for being the way this story is that just hangs together so well that you can't really complain about any, any content that is or isn't there from Scooby-Doo, I feel like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I also like this moment between Daphne and Velma because it was more about Velma's character revelation of being gay, but also just, she's like a virgin too, coming into her sexuality and like almost becoming an adult in that sense, but not having it be like, oh, she was my first love and a forever romance or anything like that. She was just like, I accept this for what it is. And that's cool.
Yeah, and that encounter doesn't really turn into anything in the immediate either.
And they're still friends,
Yeah.
Yeah. I also just like this line afterwards where, like, Fred tears up his draft card and, like, kind of, comes and shows it to Daphne. He's like, yeah, okay, I won't go to Vietnam. And, like, that's, him kind of getting back together with her, right? He's, like, giving in on this fight.
Right. And then... sorry.
Velma can't help but hide that, like, she's a little bit disappointed in this moment by that happening. And Daphne says, oh, hon, be who you are and people will love you. They won't be able to help themselves, believe me. A sweet sentiment that has, however, been proven wrong on more than one occasion, but I took it to heart as good advice and good policy.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
I just like that line.
Yeah.
But
I was thinking the same thing that they... that's proven not true, but it's a nice policy. I was thinking that before they wrote that, before I read that, yeah.
What's funny is when I read that, I was like, it's great that she could think that way, considering, she just had sex with a person she's been pining after, like her first sexual relationship. And I'm like, that might not be how she thought about it at the time. Because this is being constructed as a memoir narrative. Mm-hmm. So I like that it was kind of like a little bit coy. It was like, she might have felt a little more upset about that at the time, but she's not giving that away in the narrative,
Not what the story was about specifically.
Right.
Well, speaking about what the story was about, up until now we've kind of described, I guess, a story arc and character arcs, more or less. They feel kind of organic, memoir-y character arcs, but like stuff is happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then in this last part of the story, it feels like falling action at first because it starts speeding up, like in terms of like how much time is being covered in Velma's memoirs, right?
Right.
And they get to San Francisco, they settle down there, and they, some of them end up with jobs temporarily or not, or like, various things happen. But it also introduces what is essentially a new conflict and kind of brings it into the end of the story.
Yeah.
Which is perhaps surprising.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's not very much explored, but probably that can be reflected in the fact that they weren't that involved with it when it was happening.
Right. And so they kind of, find a shared house that they're living in, not just the four of them, obviously, like, other people as well, and set themselves up. And I've just got a comment here that the author's very good at the like late 60s references in two ways, both in terms of like making all these references to things that were a thing at the time, but also in terms of like, the author kind of makes a point. Velma says like, oh, people ask if we were involved in like such and such an event or whatever. And it's like, no, we were way too late for that. We didn't do any of that.
Oh yeah,
like
I like that part.
She was like, Shaggy went to Woodstock, but like none of the rest of us did. And it's just like they were there. It feels like he's making a point that they were there at that time, but that doesn't mean they were like doing everything.
Yeah.
They had their lives that interacted more or less with like these kinds of things that in retrospect would be kind of historical. Whatever. I feel like it's well done.
They mention that there are protests they went to. There were gatherings and organized events they went to. But they wouldn't necessarily be the ones that stood out in our historical context because there were so many, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I appreciate that because it's like there are plenty of people who were there at the time who didn't go to everything. They didn't go to the thing that mattered most because they didn't know it would be the thing that mattered the most, right? They still went to plenty of it. If they knew it was the thing
that mattered most, they would have gone to it.
Exactly, yeah. But, you know, they were real people and they participated in action that did matter.
Right.
What's interesting about recording this a second time is that we recorded the first one in like early May, I think. Mm-hmm. And since then, some shit's happened.
Yeah, that's true.
I can't help but reflect and wonder, are we going to get the same questions, you know?
Yeah. Like, I mean, my answer is going to be like, yeah, geez, I didn't go to any kind of protest or anything. Well, I had a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old, and that was kind of all I was doing.
I was quarantining at home
fan fiction.
With my own problems, yeah.
It doesn't matter,
I'm
though.
Very sorry, history.
I've been to so many anti-police brutality protests, but nothing in the last couple of weeks because my dad is, like an immunocompromised over 65 group of people, and I'm worried about exposing him to the virus because I still see him to help him out with stuff.
Yeah.
So that's life, you know? We're always going to be a part of it. We're always going to be able to do something.
It was a fun detail, though, that they had boring answers like that in the fanfic, too.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Another one of those true-to-life things.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so in summary, for the characters, Daphne and Fred, they end up like getting some jobs, kind of settling in, selling out to some extent or not. They get married. They like have a child or two. They get divorced. Like it's a whole kind of thing. And we get a description also about like how Velma's writing career gets started, which is basically that like she writes some book of like serious feminist essays for some small publishing house, but like convinces them to publish a book of fiction of hers at the same time. And they're like, sure, why not?
Yeah, they approached her to publish a collection of those essays, and she was like, only if I can also publish a fiction book that I want. And they're like, yeah, sure, whatever.
And as we said, it's not fictionalized Scooby-Doo. It's like a mystery of her own.
I love what they went with.
Tell us.
Well, I don't have the name in front of me, but that French detective name that she was going to be in Montreal, she ended up writing
Ramona D'Artagnan. Yeah.
Yeah. She ended up writing up a kid detective story about that.
Yeah.
That's very real, too, because I know artistic people who like have like characters they designed when they were a little kid, and they've just been like waiting their whole lives to like work that into an actual story, and like eventually they do, and sometimes they, you know, get success through it.
Yeah.
And it also seems fitting that she achieves, you know, publishing, you know, writing success through mysteries, both because, you know, Scooby-Doo, mystery connection, that kind of thing. And also because mysteries are just such a huge genre, and there's like, you know, so many authors that can become successful authors writing mysteries.
But man, a detective series with like a lesbian detective, I have to read that from the 60s.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess that's the unbelievable part about it, huh? Is that she would, but obviously she doesn't pigeonhole herself to that extent. And there's actually a whole thing about how she starts writing another series that is not about a lesbian detective, and some of her like fans are kind of pissed that like she's selling out or whatever, but she's like, I just want to write another character.
Yeah.
Honestly, that's what felt a little unbelievable to me, is that her fan base was apparently, of her lesbian detective, was apparently like big enough to make her famous, but when she wrote a straight man detective, everyone got pissed. It's like...
Well, they talked about their radical, or some of their fan base being upset with it, which is any fan base with anything.
Oh, sure. I mean, I agree that, some of the fan base would be upset, but at the time, writing a lesbian detective, I don't know if that wouldn't have got her that popular, you know? It would have been niche.
Yeah. They mentioned it was the quality of the stories that got them into the mainstream. more than
Right.
anything
In
else.
which case, I guess, yeah, it's some subset that got upset. Anyway,
Yeah.
this is an interesting part because you, like we said, you'd think the story would kind of end at the end of her memoir, but it keeps going.
It does. Last thing about Daphne, not about Daphne. Last thing about Velma briefly. For a little while, she dates Valerie from Josie and the Pussycats, and I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Yeah. That's cute, though.
I mean, sure.
I mean,
Why not?
It's a cute nod.
Josie and the Pussycats are in this universe too. So, as like a one-hit wonder from the 60s when, like, you know, they originally were created. Or no, not 60s, 70s in that case. Which also feels realistic, I guess. But the main drama here is with Shaggy. And Shaggy kind of gets his own, you know, career going too. He starts roadieing for, of all bands. I was leaving that as an opening for you, Tori.
I was trying to remember. That was it Fish? What was it?
No, Sly and the Family Stone.
Oh, Sly and the Family Stone. That's right, of course. Well, okay, it's been a while, y'all. That was crazy though, because he had like close relationship with everybody in the band, kind of too. Which is, I guess Velma makes a comment on saying that she'd think that would be the band he gravitated towards, but you know, I think Shaggy's a funky guy, so.
Yeah, and she was saying it was kind of like the optimism and, like, you know, inclusiveness that like drew him in, because he was always like an optimistic kind of guy who like wanted people to be feeling good and happy.
Yeah. That it was the upbeat music that drew Shaggy in.
Yeah.
But then his life starts going up and down from drug abuse.
Right.
And they talk about
like he overdoses on stuff.
They talk about this in broad strokes over a period of time.
Yeah, we get like kind of a initial incident that shows everyone, hey, like this is really serious, where at Fred and Daphne's, like, you know, little wedding, he pukes and has to be taken away in an ambulance.
ODs, doesn't he?
Yes.
Sounds right, yeah. And so, but then after that, it's in pretty broad strokes. But I like the broad strokes, or I like how they're written here. It's like it's a transition out of, you know, Velma crying by Shaggy's side when he's in the hospital, and, you know, he's awake and he tries to soothe her. And also he like seems more with it and like more present there than he has on average for a long time. She says, "Hey now, sister," he croaked, his voice a little abused by that morning's show. "No more of that. It, like, gets better from here. I never wanted to believe anything more in my whole life." Shaggy did get better. Then got worse. Then even worse. Then better. For a while. Then he just vanished. And it's just kind of like that drug abuse or addiction story. Like, it's never a smooth line. So I just also kind of really appreciated, even if it's only in like a couple lines of the story, just kind of suggesting the outline of, like, you know, this happened over a course of time, and like there were ups and there were downs, and, you know, he pulled himself together, and then he kind of like, you know, had bad times as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there was also a strong suggestion that it was like kind of his affiliation with the band that kept dragging him back in.
Yeah, it's Velma's, you know, Velma's sort of musing about it or theorizing about it, right? Because, like, she didn't know what was going on in his life very directly. But that is part of what she says. She's like, I don't think there were many people who were kind of like holding him back, you know, or moderating him at that time in his life.
Right.
Yeah, there we are. Shaggy had always pushed his own boundaries, and though I would never point a hypocritical finger, there was most likely not a voice of moderation amongst his new family in the music scene.
Yeah, and that's fair because, you know, we talk about, like, musicians, especially at the time. You know, I think that's accurate for the experience of a lot of those folks. I mean, it's a tough place to be in if you are an addict and everybody around you continues to use drugs. Like, how are you going to stop?
Yeah.
you really have to put yourself entirely away from the culture. And for him, that was his, his bread earning came from being in the culture.
Yeah.
So there you go.
And that was kind of his people. It seems like he was as close to them as he was with his old college friends at that point.
Absolutely. So yeah, it definitely seemed like the author did a good job establishing that like there kind of wasn't a way out unless he really quit the scene. And that didn't seem like an option.
Mm-hmm. And then that's what sort of leads into the actual ending of the story, which is an interesting one in that it's sort of like a cap to this Shaggy story that was introduced fairly late in the game, really. Like there wasn't kind of a drug abuse plot line or like addiction plot line with him earlier on, which makes sense because like he was younger and like it was a different life circumstance and it wasn't actually an issue then, or it didn't appear to be or whatever.
But it kind of did. Like he was always high.
Yeah,
like nobody called him out, right? And like Velma's narrative didn't called attention to it, but not in a critical way.
Because I guess none of them were being critical.
Right. But, like, you can totally see it from the start, which I kind of liked.
That's true.
I like that it mirrored how she may have felt about it at the time,
Yeah, because it wasn't critical in retrospect either.
Yeah.
Right. Well, anyway, the deal is, so Shaggy disappears. He takes Scooby, and I know you said that distressed you, Tori, because you're like, he's clearly not necessarily in a position to be taking care of a dog and should probably be leaving the dog with someone who is going to be responsible all the time.
Yeah, there's a couple things, that was definitely the most distressing part for me is it's like, I understand the struggle, but I feel like, you always have the presence of mind to make a decision about other people if you care. Like, he took Scooby with him when he said he was going on tour with Sly, but he wasn't. He lied, and he just dipped. And then nobody ever saw him again. So I just, I don't feel like that was responsible.
No.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the only part of the story in which I really disliked Shaggy as a character.
But then, so here's the ending. Velma the writer who is writing these memoirs has been serializing them in like whatever this magazine is that's paying her. And she hasn't been commenting on this process, but like that's the form that this is in. It's like a series of pieces that's being published. And so in her last in this series, she describes that she got a postcard from Daphne, and Daphne's saying, "Have I got an ending for your story?" And Daphne relates this story where she was in Venice. She's like a real estate agent, so driving a client through Venice, she says, and she sees a guy selling kites on the beach, just like as they're passing in their car or whatever. And she said the guy looked just like Shaggy. She says, "I swear to God, I was a stoplight away before it hit me, and I thought about turning back to know for sure, but I couldn't. I wanted it to be him so bad that I couldn't risk finding out it wasn't. Does that make sense? But if it was him, I thought you should know he was smiling." And then Velma is just given kind of this musing ending for a couple of paragraphs here. Starting with, "It was him. It had to be. Not just because part of me needs to know he's still out there and well. Not just because I love him in a way I've never loved another man. But because it fits. It makes sense. As long as he's alive, so is the most important part of my life. As long as he lives, so does the dream that they tried so hard to cremate one day, so long ago in the panhandle of Golden Gate Park. The felon's obituary was premature, and where there is no corpse, there is no mystery. Case closed." And that obituary being like, what, for the decade, for like for the 60s counterculture, I guess.
Yeah. I was weird that they kind of used him as a symbol for that, but...
Yeah, that's what he becomes here.
Yeah, I didn't quite get that part. And also, I'm like, where's Scooby?
Well, yeah, that is a thing.
Well, it would have been like 20, 30 years later or something.
Well, I know that, but my point being is that like, they never resolved the arc of... I mean, I guess they didn't really care about Scooby, to be honest, in this story. Maybe my only, like, big criticism is it's, like, Scooby's, like, a dog they find, and Shaggy actually almost kills him by accidentally feeding him hash brownies. Poor dog.
That does happen once, yes.
Yeah, like, basically it's a dog who's been long suffering with this group of people who can't properly take care of him. Like, that's not the story I want to see for the titular character of Scooby-Doo. But anyway.
Well, right. That does bother me about it too. Not because I actually care about Scooby-Doo, really, like, you know, the dog in this story, but it's like, right. The title of the story is Scooby-Dooby-Doo, Where Are You?
Yeah.
And so one can imagine a story where the dog Scooby has become a symbol of something to Velma, and that kind of ties into her ending. And then, you know, the last line is her quoting the song, and so on, and so on, and Scooby-Dooby-Doo.
Yeah.
But it is not Scooby who becomes some kind of symbol that represents something to her. It's Shaggy.
No. Scooby's just a neglected dog in this whole story.
And so, yeah, it feels kind of like... and, you know, Scooby does feel almost like a symbol when he's first introduced, right? He's sort of the impetus for them to, like, go off on their trip and or, you know, move to the West Coast. And, like... that could have been carried onward, but it just kind of isn't. And so it's like, basically, it feels like Scooby doesn't really matter in the story. He's just there because there's a dog in the source material.
Yes.
That is a complaint of mine with this.
Well, what were you expecting? I mean, from a more realistic story?
No, mostly I was expecting a better title.
Sure.
I was expecting a better treatment of dogs.
No, it makes total sense that the story is focused on the human drama and the human development, because humans like to read about humans and write about humans and think about humans, and, you know, maybe less about the life and times of a Great Dane.
It's like movies about Hollywood, you know, they like watching about themselves.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Or what I can't stand is all those plays about actors, like stage actors and playwrights.
No, playwrights.
Where they're like, the movies are so terrible, but the stage is such a noble endeavor.
Yeah.
And I had to act in like several of those in high school, and I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Stop being so self-righteous about how much better stage acting is than movie acting.
Right.
Self-righteous and self-hating at the same time for pages and pages and pages.
Could be very smug.
Yeah.
What was the one I was in? Light Up the Sky?
Are you asking us?
Unbearable. Yes, I'm asking you to tell me what play I was in high school.
I don't remember that one. I remember
As You Like It.
Yeah. And
No, not As You Like It. It was Anything Goes.
Well, I was in that one too. Yeah.
I mean, I also don't like Anything Goes. That's true.
That's
Also
the only play I saw you in high school.
And also that one mystery one they keep on renaming because the name is racist.
Right. That's also not about the stage. But I was in another one, too, that had the same thing, where I played a Shriner backstage. I didn't have to get costumed. I only had to show up for rehearsals for the last week, and I read my lines off a script, and I still got to go to the cast party.
Wonderful.
And it was
Perfect.
my most successful role.
Amazing. Well, anyway, if I had one complaint about this fanfic, it would be, why name it after the dog if you're only going to treat the dog like shit?
Yep, agreed. And I guess we've segued well into us complaining about the fanfic before we end on praise. So what other complaints do we have besides the title indicating that Scooby should be important when in fact Scooby is not important?
I think the fact that it's a memoir lent a lot to it, but also kind of meant that they got away with some, I don't want to say weak storytelling, but not as strong, especially towards the end, where they just kind of did the equivalent of yada, yada, yada at the end.
Yeah.
And on and Scooby-Dooby-Doo.
Yeah. I mean, actually, yeah. And they introduced this, I was going to say Scabby, that's not right, Shaggy. The Shaggy thing. Maybe as an attempt to find a way to end the story, because like I can understand wanting to tell the story of them, where they started from, and them going to San Francisco and then getting there, but they might have hung around too long after that and had to find a way to find the off-ramp.
Yeah. I agree with you about that kind of story structure, storytelling. It feels like a story, and, not the tightest story, but as a memoir, it feels very appropriate. Mm-hmm. And then it feels like the story reaches a climax. Then it feels like it just kind of keeps going for a while and then stops. There's like something of that. And I know it's kind of, it's partly the sort of like, this is what happened in our lives later on, because obviously you're going to be curious about that.
Yeah.
But it doesn't go into that much. I mean, it goes into simultaneously too much and not enough detail.
Yeah.
It doesn't hang together structurally as a story all the time. I agree.
I feel like it descends into the depths. Like, I don't know how y'all feel about the Fred and Daphne story, but they have a painful divorce. Fred cheats on her and everything. And I just felt like at that point, yeah, that might be someone's real story. But for it to be summarized so quickly, it kind of felt like unnecessary drama.
Right.
I think it might have been another symptom of the off-ramp coming up. They just wanted to quickly get through it, perhaps.
Yeah. That might be the case. It's definitely kind of a storytelling, I don't know, it reminds me of certain movies. Like at the end of Animal House, where like, those two got married and then they divorced later because blah, blah, blah kind of thing.
Yeah.
I've never seen Animal House.
Well, it's that college movie thing where they stop, like, such and such graduated, became a senator,
okay,
etc.
They just they give the text under the character's picture telling what happened in the next 20 years of their life.
Yeah.
That's what this felt like.
Okay. Yeah, I know what you mean. Don't they do that in Greece?
No.
Okay.
They fly off in a car.
I'm confusing myself.
Or was that Grease too?
Anyway, let's move on to praise then, because like I said, I had us talk about this again because I liked the story. Mm-hmm. And so I think we have some good things to say about it. We've said some of them.
Yeah, I mean, you read one of my favorite paragraphs of the story, Amato. I read my other favorite. The writing is actually spectacular. The voice of Velma as a character is really strong. I would buy this as someone's real memoir.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we were saying last time, maybe we shouldn't be saying that all the time, emphasize what you're missing, but it really sells itself well as memoirs being written by a confident writer who enjoys writing and has fun writing.
And as that point,
which is
at this point in their life, have zero fucks to give.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I mean, part of that is just saying it's strong writing. So yes, it feels like it can be by a professional writer. Mm-hmm. And part of it is just sort of that tone that we're trying to get at here. Someone with a voice who is not afraid to use it, who already knows they're getting paid for this no matter what they write, who can just write whatever they feel like writing, and so they're writing something that they're enjoying writing. It's very fun to read, and it feels it feels like the thing that it's supposed to be.
It's very Joan Didion.
I feel like I've read one Joan Didion piece in college, but that sounds right. You were the English major, so I'll assume that's a very astute comparison.
She definitely does a lot of personal writing that's really strong in her stance as a woman with her experience, and taking that and being I'm going to stand tall and strong with my experience. And I don't know. She's controversial too, because some of the things she writes, I'm no, I don't like that you did that or said that. But she owns it all of the time. And I feel like that's what this author evokes.
Yeah, I really enjoyed reading this. I mean, we've read a lot of different things. And this one was especially... this was what I was looking forward to reading when I wasn't reading it. Mm-hmm. And I personally also enjoy that kind of first-person storytelling voice. That's not that far away from the campfire story sort of feel.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Then listeners, if you know of any other good old fanfics written in a personal essay memoir style, creative nonfiction sort of tone, send those recommendations our way, because it turns out that might kind of be our thing.
Yeah, I mean, if it's well written, man. You know?
Yeah, this was just a really well written story, and the fact that it was a fan fiction also made it very transformative from the original media in such an interesting way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
so. The next time someone asks you what one of your favorite books is that you've read, in the last whatever time, you'll say like, well, there was this one Scooby-Doo fanfic that I thought was that really spoke to me.
I would say that too.
it's for real though. Like, this is everything you wouldn't expect from a Scooby-Doo fanfiction, and yet it still retains its tether to Scooby-Doo in a weird way.
Yeah, in fact, I'll go out of my way to say that none of what I expected from a Scooby-Doo fanfiction was in here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the most impressive thing to me is that I still see it as Scooby-Doo in its own weird way, even though it's so different.
Even though it took till half the story to introduce the conceit of the Scooby-Doo stories.
Yeah.
Right.
It still holds. I swear to God, I don't know how, but it did.
So there you go. Go experience Scooby Dooby Doo, Where Are You? If you liked Scooby Doo, Where Are You? Or Doobies in the 60s.
Nice.
Or just in general.
Yeah, or just in general. And I think we're going to close out this episode in that case. Mm-hmm. This was episode 87 of Retro Fanfic Retrospective, Scooby Dooby Doo, Where Are You? By Yorick Jones. And I can tell you where Scooby Dooby Doo, Where Are You? Is, because it's on fanfiction.net. And you can find a link to it at bit.ly/RFR Scooby.
You're telling me they can't just Google Scooby Dooby Doo, Where Are You? And find it?
Actually, you can.
I feel like... Really?
Well, with the word fanfiction, you can. Yes, it's the first thing that comes up.
I mean, I have seen people recommend it online. Soon this is going to eclipse the original work.
I think the original work has it beaten by sheer volume alone.
Cannot be eclipsed. The intro song to the podcast is The Weekly Fair off of the album Popey's Incredible Adventure by Komiku. The outro song is Run Against the Universe from the same album. You can find this album and other works by Komiku at loyaltyfreakmusic.com. You can find our website at retrofanficretrospective.podbean.com or bit.ly/retrofanfic. And if you have questions, comments, or thoughts about the episode, you can find us on Twitter or Reddit or Facebook or Instagram at retrofanfic or fanfic retrospective. It's going to be one of those two. Uh-huh. You can also send us an email at retrofanficretrospective@gmail.com or leave comments or reviews on the podcast service that you use to listen to us. Or you could just tell all your friends. You could put up leaflets around town, I assume. I'm not sure what you would put on those leaflets.
Can we buy advertising space in a fanzine or something?
Oh yeah, fanzines. That's the way to get the word out.
Right.
You are correct. Why didn't I think of that?
Seriously.
Just buy advertising space on the side of a van.
Drive it across the country. I mean, if you solved crimes while you're doing it, it would definitely get your attention.
Absolutely.
But the only way you can guarantee there'd be crimes to solve was if somebody else went in front of you causing crimes.
I mean, that can be arranged.
Don't say that, Amato.
By the way, none of you heard anything, right? You can't tell, but I'm winking.
We are just coming up with like the most cutting edge viral advertising ideas right now.
Committing crimes.
Yeah, no.
And then solving them and having people pay for advertising space on your crime solving van.
I mean,
anyway,
I got a great...
I'm Amato.
I'm Tori.
I'm Dom.
And I totally cut off Dom.
That's okay. Well, I'll just delete that. So it sounded like it was appropriate.
Got it.
Well,
I'm going to start that again.
We'll fix it in post.
I'm Amato.
Damn it.
Stop doing that.
Okay. We're just three Earth life forms trying to be nice to each other. Until next time, take care.
Are we not seeing our names again?
No, someone says Scooby-Dooby-Doo.
Says what? Are we not seeing our names again?
No, someone says Scooby Dooby Doo.
It says what?
How do you say it?
Raggy.
Raggy.
Yeah. Red is looking at me now.
That's because you're speaking dog.
I'm not sure which of our impressions were the least bad there.
Red says they are all
Yeah,
bad.
I'm not sure a tenor should be trying that voice. Raggy. Sounds like the guy that would be unmasked
Yeah.
at the end. Okay.